So let's talk about watering. The basics are you need to water your succulents whenever the soil gets completely dry. Don't leave it totally dry for a long time. Like as soon as it gets totally dry, water it again. The easiest way to tell is by the weight of the pot. Pick it up and if it feels light, it's probably a good time to water it. You kind of get the hang of the whole hand weighing thing after a while. You get the feel for how light it is when it needs watering and how heavy it is once it's been fully watered. If you're struggling with the hand weighing thing, there's a few other ways you can tell. So feel the bottom drainage holes to see if they're moist. If they are, leave it another day or so and keep checking until it's completely dry. And if the leaves don't feel nice and solid, or they're getting kind of a little bit squishy, or it's just looking a bit wilted, then water could be the problem. So now you know when to water it, let's talk about how to water it. I use water that I leave sitting out overnight because I've heard that some of the chemicals in the water evaporate out and it lets it get to room temperature. You don't want to shock the roots with hot or cold water. With a lot of succulents, it's easier to bottom water them, especially if they're quite big in their pots because there's not enough surface that you can get to water them from the top. Plus, with bottom watering, you don't get the leaves wet. It's not the end of the world if they get wet, but it's just better to not get them wet if you don't have to. Plus, it makes sure all of the soil gets saturated through, which encourages the roots to grow down. Sometimes when you water from the top, if there's not much surface that you can get to with the water, then you end up just kind of watering the edges of the soil and the inner core of the soil doesn't get wet. So to bottom water, I just stick my plant in a bowl of water so that the water comes about halfway up the pot and I leave it to wick up as much water as it wants and then I take it out. Don't leave it sitting in the water too long. These guys are quite small, so a few minutes is enough for them. You don't want them sitting in water like this for hours, otherwise they're going to get really upset. 10-15 minutes is probably a good time. The big problem with bottom watering is salt buildup in the soil. Sometimes you'll see a white layer on top of the soil, and that's usually from the salts from bottom watering. Top watering flushes the salts out of the soil through the drainage holes, so every third or fourth watering, I water from the top. You should have an idea of how heavy the pot is when the soil's totally soaked from the bottom watering, and that's what you're aiming for with top watering. Pour the water on the top of the soil until it comes running out of the bottom. It's better to water in the morning so that if any of the leaves get wet, they have time to dry out through the day. And if you have any puddles of water in the leaves, then blow that extra water out of there. If you're having problems getting the soil to totally saturate with top watering, then you could bottom water it and then top water it straight away afterwards to try and flush some of those salts out of the soil. Some soils repel water when they get really dry, so if your soil's looking kind of waxy and water's beading on the top or just running straight down the sides of the pot and out the drainage holes, then you really need to get it into a different type of soil. But in the meantime, bottom watering it is going to help break down that waxy layer and let the soil absorb water. But yeah, really you're going to need to repot that into some kind of soil that is not going to do that, like a succulent soil. If you notice that the leaves are going kind of translucent, maybe a bit yellow or brownish, they're getting soft and mushy, or they just look like balloons that are about to burst, then you're probably overwatering them. Make sure the soil's completely dry before you water them again. If your succulent's leaves are starting to wrinkle up a bit, if it's looking wilted or the leaves aren't as firm as they usually are, then you're probably underwatering it. Even though you need to let the soil completely dry out between waterings, you don't want to leave them in completely dry soil for too long. Really try and catch them, the same day or a couple of days afterwards. If they're in completely dry soil for a week or two, they're going to start to be a bit sad. A lot of succulents will recover from underwatering like that. Overwatering is a bit more of a problem. Succulents have growth cycles, so they go dormant at certain times of the year, usually either in winter or summer. And when they're dormant, they don't need as much water. They'll take a little longer to dry out between waterings. And then once they come out of dormancy, they'll pick back up again. So if you have a succulent that seems to not need watering quite as much as it did, then it could be going through its dormant phase. Have a check online for that particular succulent. If you're having problems with the soil staying wet for too long between waterings and your plant's in a plastic pot, then you could try moving it to terracotta or unglazed clay, because the porous walls of those types of pots absorb moisture from the soil, so it'll help the soil dry out faster and more evenly compared to a plastic pot where the moisture either has to come out of the top or the drainage holes. If your succulent's in a pot without a drainage hole, then you're a monster. And check out this video I made specially for you. If you've just got your first succulent, congratulations, and tell me what it is in the comments.